the top. And if you'd like to put your organization that you're with on your name, please do that. And for anyone who at the very beginning can put on their camera, that would be lovely to see you. But we recognize that people may be dealing with bandwidths as well. And I'll come back to you in a moment. We have a few more people online. Okay, I think we should possibly get started. I know it's people's lunch break as well. So just hello, very warm welcome to everyone. My name is Finola Finnan. I'm the chairperson of Dóchas, and I'm delighted to moderate this event in that capacity. So thank you all for taking the time. As you all know, the UN Secretary General will convene a Food System Summit in September 2021. It's a really important moment, and it's part of the UN decade of action to deliver on the Sustainable Development Goals. So we're very pleased that you can join us for the event today. It is a joint event of the Irish Government, IFIAD and Dóchas. And why we wanted to call people today is really so that we can gather together to give you an up-to-date briefing on the Food System Summit and Ireland's engagement and priorities, but also very importantly to hear what your priorities are as Ireland prepares for the pre-summit, which is on next week, and indeed for the summit in September. So what we would really like is that you get a chance to the expert views, but also it's an opportunity to have your own voices heard. And we would like to leave ample time for questions and answers, and it is a dialogue, so we want it to be that as such. We all know the figures are going in the wrong direction. I think the most recent report on the state of food security and nutrition in the world shockingly showed that hunger figures were on the rise by over 100 million. And we know that progress on things like reducing child stunting has slowed significantly, while at the same time we're seeing adult overweight and obesity continuing in rich and poor countries alike. So, you know, lots to digest, and transformation absolutely needed on food systems. So we'll hear lots more about that today, but maybe just to get a few housekeeping things out of the way. As I said, please put your name on if you can, so people can see who you are. The format for today will be a panel discussion, followed by some questions and answers, and a discussion on the upcoming summit. We're in listening mode. Notes will be taken to hear your opinions, your views, and your comments, and they will be taken on board by the team leading in Ireland. There will be opportunities for questions and comments, so I would encourage people to put that in the chat, and you can put it as you're hearing people's views, and we'd love to hear from you. And we look forward to a very interesting and full discussion. But before we start, we thought it might be interesting to hear just really what has your engagement been with the summit to date, and by that I mean attending dialogues and events, following summit news or any updates. So it can be any sort of engagement. So you will see a poll on your screen, thanks to Isabel and IFIAD in a moment. I can't see it quite yet, but there we go. So if people could fill that out, that would be great. And submit that, and that'll give us a sense of just the range across the call. And perhaps while we're waiting for you all to fill that out, I can be asking first person to get ready to come in. So I'm delighted to have Michelle Winthrop, who's going to provide some opening remarks to us. And Michelle, as many of you will know, is the director of the policy unit in Irish Aid, and of course has been centrally involved in this whole process and will continue to be. So maybe, I don't know if we have the result of that. I know we can be very quick on Zoom, but Isabel, are we ready?
The votes aren't coming through on the poll.
Okay, well, maybe if you can continue to, if people, did people see that? Maybe you put it in the chat there. There we go. Let's try it again. And if people could select one of the options below. Were you extremely engaged, very engaged, somewhat engaged, not so engaged, or not at all engaged? And if you could select one and submit it, and then we will come back to that in a few minutes and see how people are doing. Okay, hopefully most of you have voted. And in the meantime, I'm delighted to welcome Michelle to give the opening remarks. So Michelle.
Thanks so much, Finola. Look, it's great to see you all. Great to see friends and colleagues, past and present, and old and new, most older than newer. Look, thanks a million for this. I suppose just a few words from my side. Next Monday, as many of you will know, we'll see the opening of the Food Systems Pre-Summit. We're very busy preparing for that. So this is a really important time for today's conversation, I think. This crowd doesn't need to be told this, but I will remind you all that all 17 of the SDGs really do rely in some way on healthier, more sustainable and more equitable food systems. And that's really our focus today. The Food Systems Summit represents a fantastic opportunity for Ireland to bring our experience and our expertise to the table and really play that meaningful leading role in championing transformative food systems. But we do know that global food and nutrition security are under strain, as Finola mentioned. I am constantly struck by a chilling fact that was given at the recent CMAM conference earlier this year, that 12 children die every minute from malnutrition-related illness or hunger. And that's really shocking in 2021. Irish policies, our foreign policy and our international development policy, A Global Island and a Better World, both recognise that there's a lot to do and really reinforce Ireland's commitment to keeping up the global picture on addressing hunger. A key marker of a sustainable food system ought to be zero hunger. That should be our key success metric as we move forward with the food systems approach. Food systems need to produce enough nutritious, affordable foods that are sustainably produced, consumed, and if necessary, disposed of. A Better World makes a very explicit commitment to adopting this sustainable food systems approach. And that builds on our track record of championing the furthest behind first, championing hunger, and supporting sustainable livelihoods programmes. Ireland's priority is that the Food Systems Summit process is meaningful. And that really is important. This is intended to be a people's summit. I hope you will agree that the recent food systems dialogues that we held jointly with Department of Agriculture really reflected that spirit of inclusivity. The pre-summit is designed to generate momentum that will carry us through the summit and into the Nutrition for Growth Summit in December. Now, Nutrition for Growth is critical because it is where all governments will commit the necessary financing to action what was agreed at the Food Systems Summit. As we talk of food systems transformation, though, Ireland has actively and consistently championed the need for ending hunger to be central to our efforts. We are in a unique position as Ireland to champion solutions that work, based on our experience of advocacy around the right to food, our experience from Irish Aid programming, as well as our world-class expertise in food safety and agribusiness. The Food Systems Summit and Nutrition for Growth are important opportunities for Ireland to drive zero hunger in 2021. We do have other opportunities. We have our tenure on the UN Security Council, we have our engagement on the Human Rights Council, and our position on the IFIAD Executive Board, which goes through till 2023. We really need to grasp these opportunities, especially as we enter the second half of the Decade of Action on Nutrition, with a hunger epidemic on our hands. There is so much to do. So today is important. Why? I mean, there are really two reasons as I see it. Many of you will know, most of you will know, that we recently conducted a major evaluation of our work as Irish Aid with NGOs. And a key finding of that was that we needed to engage more consistently and more proactively in policy dialogue with our civil society partners. Frankly, that's on me. That's my job. So I'm hoping personally that we can learn a bit from today and how to get that right going forward and how to structure more of these high quality conversations with you all. But also today is a really big opportunity for us as the government to really capture your views in advance of the summit on the whole food systems agenda and hunger. So as Finola mentioned, we're very much in listening mode today. We'll take really good notes. We may come back to you on issues that you've raised. And I'm really hoping we have a great discussion. I really look forward to it. Back to you, Finola.
Great, thank you so much, Michelle, and that really sets the stage for us and in terms of the importance of the engagement. So thanks very much for that. I saw our poll flash up so fast I couldn't read it, but Isabel, can you push it up? Oh, there we go. Okay, very good. So what we see there is 21% extremely engaged, 31% very engaged, 36% somewhat engaged, and then a smaller proportion in the last two. So that's a pretty good picture. So I think we have a good spread of people, those who are very well informed and those who want to be better informed. So I hope that our panel discussion, it's good for the panelists to know that ahead of speaking, and they can answer accordingly. So anyway, I am delighted to be joined by three excellent panelists. So we have Tom Arnold, and Tom is Ireland's Special Envoy on Food Systems, and he's the chair of Ireland's Agri-Food Strategy 2030 Committee. You're very welcome, Tom, and lots of other hats, but for brevity, we're going just with that one. We have Sophie Hilital, and Sophie is the co-chair of the UN Food Systems Summit Youth Liaison Group, and she is also the co-founder of Act for Food, a global youth-led movement to bring about food systems change. Also very welcome, Sophie. Great to have you here. And last but not least, Charlie Spillane. Charlie is the director of the Ryan Institute at NUI Galway, and he's the chair of IFIAD, the Irish Forum for International Agricultural Development. And we're also very delighted to have Paul Kieran here today. Paul is the Deputy Permanent Representative of Ireland to the United Nations in Rome, and obviously has been very central to all of this as well in Rome. And Paul, we're great to have you here, and we will be fielding some questions your way if it seems appropriate to do so. So I believe you're open to that, so thanks very much. Okay, so maybe we'll just get started just with some, perhaps if I can turn to Tom first. And we've heard, Ireland, is a real champion of this. It was one of the first UN member states to provide both political and also was the first to appoint a special envoy on food systems, with yourself. So, I mean, I think it's really important that we mark that. It's also billed as Michelle was saying, very much as a people's summit and a solution-focused summit with bold actions and solutions and strategies to deliver on all SDGs. So maybe it would be helpful, Tom, if you could explain why you think the Food Summit, System Summit is so important, and perhaps explain a little bit about what you hope it will achieve in terms of those bold actions,
Okay, thank you very much, Finola, and indeed I echo Michelle's remark about how important it is today that there is an opportunity for people from across the sector to both come up to date, but also that to hear their views. Your basic question is, why is the Food System Summit important? I think the answer is that it's important because politically, food is being given a central role in this year, 2021. And it's rare that this happens. If you look at history, there's only been 6 times over the last about 80 years when food has risen up to the top of the international political agenda. The very first time it happened was actually in 1943 during the Second World War. And there was a genuine concern about what would happen or what would be required to happen after the war. And one of the things that happened at that 1943 meeting was a decision to set up the Food and Agriculture Organization, FAO. And there's one common characteristic of the 6 occasions when the world has had a summit relating to food. And it is that big decisions were taken on each occasion. Decisions that attempted to deal with the problem at hand, and mainly over most of those summits, the problem at hand was not enough food. But on this occasion, what's different is that food is being recognized as being central to a wider agenda connecting the environment and health. And that's why the Food System Summit is of such significance in this year. And as you, Fionnuala, said, it connects on to the Nutrition for Growth Summit later on. And indeed, it connects very directly to the COP26, which will take place in Glasgow in November. So for me, the significance of this year is that food and its interconnectedness with environment and health is been given the proper political importance that it deserves. And the real test as to whether this summit will be successful or not is, will there be decisions taken at this summit which will lead to policy change, both nationally and internationally? And part of that, of course, will be to fully recognize the very worrying trend that has the recent report has shown, that 180 million additional people in the past year are suffering from hunger. But we're looking at food in its wider context, in dealing with the triple burden of malnutrition, dealing with the connection with health, dealing with connection with the environment. And can we envisage and put in place a set of policies nationally and internationally which will begin to face up to the major challenges that we face?
Very good. And in terms of, you mentioned there the national and international, and we know that Ireland's Agri-Food Strategy supports the food systems approach. And you also mentioned that holistic, the environment, health, but also social and economic presumably comes into that.
Yeah.
Just link the Agri-Food Strategy and what's its relevance for the summit, Tom, and how they interconnect.
I think the basic relevance is that in our Agri-Food Strategy 2030, which we hope can be launched very soon, the central point of that is that we are seeking to have a policy in place which delivers sustainability in its 3 dimensions: economic, environmental, and social. And that's the policy framework that we will articulate, or we have articulated in our document. And that, I hope, is the framing policy for Ireland for the next decade. And I think we're in a very advantageous position here, because I think we're the only country, to the best of my knowledge, that has developed its food strategy, future food strategy, based on using this food systems approach. And for this audience, there's another important aspect which will appear in this strategy. And it is the commitment to have a policy coherence between our domestic policy on sustainability and our foreign policy and foreign and development aid policy on the connection with sustainable food systems. So this is definitely, by comparison to any of the previous agri-food strategies, I would say an innovation and a welcome policy direction, which I think should be supported by most of the people on this call.
Very good. And in terms of that, the international, the foreign policy, we also know that this summit is very much, about reaching out to countries, and that it certainly has an ambition to have dialogues in a whole series of countries leading up to the main event in July and September 2021. In your view, Tom, has that engagement of developing countries lived up to that expectation? And what's your sense of how well it has gone and how inclusive it has been?
Well, my sense is that there's firstly been a very clear effort and statement that inclusiveness is absolutely central to what this Food System Summit is about. That's been very much the watchword of Agnes Kalibata, the Special Envoy, from the beginning. very much the watchword of people like David Nabarro and Lawrence Haddad, who many people will know. And I've been struck in the last few months through some of my other engagements, particularly in connection with Africa, to see the number of African countries and the number, and also at the level of the African Union, to acknowledge that this is really an important moment for Africa to have its voice heard at this Food System Summit. And I think I've been struck by a number of things that I've engaged in about and it's by no means every African country, but there is a significant number of African countries that are asking the question, how can we shape our own national policy to connect with what appears to be emerging from the Food System Summit? And that means really to give more attention to policy framed using a food systems approach.
Thank you very much. I might move on to Sophie now, Tom, and I'll come back to you in due course. But the other group, I mean, obviously there's an ambition to reach out to a wide range of stakeholders, including young people. And they do have a critical role, Sophie, in shaping sustainable production and consumption and making connections. So I know you've been very involved in the Act for Food, Act for Change campaign, and you've also mobilized young people around food systems transformation. But maybe tell us, what are some of the ideas and solutions that you're hearing from younger people that they want to be brought forward to the summit?
Yeah, well, the UN Food System Summit has engaged young people in a way that no UN summit has done before. It's been a really interesting and motivating place to be as a young person. As part of the youth liaison group to the UN Food System Summit, we have direct connection to the UN Secretariat, and we are made up of over 150 young people from right across the globe, part of formal member state structures, but also part of civil society networks and individual activists. And we've created different forms of communication which are completely youth-led. Some of these forms have been the Act for Food, Act for Change campaign, which is made up of 26 young people from across the globe pledging to galvanize food system transformation globally and regionally and also locally. And we've also created another form, which is the Youth Consultation Platform, which it can be found on the UN Food System Summit community platform, and then also through youth-led independent dialogues and youth conveners of dialogues. So through these three different youth networks, we've been able to gather youth priorities for the UN Food System Summit, and we brought these to 5 top global youth priorities that young people across the globe want to bring to the UN Food System Summit pre-summit. We've been given a very special section in the formal pre-summit agenda for youth priorities and asking member states, civil society and businesses to stand with us or really against us. And these top 5 priorities are 1, everyone should be able to access and afford safe and nutritious food. 2, build food systems that promote decent and productive employment for all. 3, use advertising to promote healthy food and restrict junk food advertising. And 4, ensure that food production and consumption patterns reduce the negative impact on climate. And although these are global youth priorities for action for this Food System Summit, we can also break these down into regional priorities. So it's been a really interesting place to become involved, and we're really excited to bring these priority action areas youth have created to the pre-summit and then onto the formal System Summit in September. Sorry, Finola, I think you're on mute.
So I am double mute, so that always gets you. Sorry, Sophie. What I was saying was, from your involvement with coalitions across the globe, are you seeing different advocacy issues emerging in different places? And are there voices of dissent in places where youth, are staying outside the process, maybe?
Yes, definitely. For example, there's been really big issues in engaging the Indigenous community within the UN Food Systems Summit process from the beginning, and especially when it comes to youth networks. This is for a range of different reasons, but is something that is causing quite a lot of friction, but also quite a really great space for collaborative, cross-cutting issues and conversations in parts of, for example, Kenya and Nigeria. What the top global actions seem to be coming from there are more focused on traditional local food knowledge and practice. But from Europe, we're seeing the promotion of plant-based diets as a really top global priority for youth. And then in India and Bangladesh, what we're seeing is young people really want to get a place at decision-making tables and part of decision-making structures. And then also quite closely linking to that is the banning of single-use plastics in the food industry. So we're seeing really, really interesting conversations regionally and how diverse they can be. But what we're also really seeing is the number one priority for all countries, no matter what, is access to sufficient, safe and nutritious food for all, and also healthy school meals to be introduced as part of national policies. So although we have these wide differencing areas that are priorities for youth, we're also seeing these two really big similarities across nearly all countries.
Very good. And I suppose it also highlights, how context specific things are, in terms of sustainable solutions, and it's worth remembering that. So thanks, Sophie. And maybe turning to Charlie now. Charlie, as the IFIAD chair, you have been engaging obviously with various stakeholders and members here, and maybe just tell us what are some of the concerns or issues that people are excited about, but also some of the challenges that you're hearing in the forum.
Yeah, thanks very much, Finola. Yeah, so IFIAD, just so that people know what IFIAD is, we're a multi-stakeholder forum here in Ireland, comprised of, we've got government departments, state agencies, universities, NGOs, and farming bodies, and also some private sector. We've an openness to private sector involvement as well. So we've been trying to build, I suppose, over the past couple of years, consensus and connections and a network to mobilize Ireland's expertise in the agri-food sector so that it can be put to best task in terms of our international development objectives. So in that sense, we've been running a range of events over the past year in relation to the Food Summit. We ran three very successful webinar events with UCC, which were on building back better in the post-COVID context, also on access to nutritious foods, and also on women's empowerment and nutrition. We've also been engaging in the national dialogues, and we also have done a collaboration with the Malawi Irish Consortium on Gender-Based Violence, and looking at gender equality for food systems transformation in Malawi, an event we held in Lilongwe. So we've had a lot of engagement. I suppose in a broad sense, the IFIAD members are hugely excited about the Food Summit and the openness of the process leading to it, and the ability for independent dialogues to be popped up and run by anybody basically who wishes to do so. That openness is certainly to be welcomed. In general, the IFIAD members, that they're very excited by the 5 action tracks that have been identified, and also the big portfolio of game-changing solutions that have been put on the table, basically. Like a lot of the IFIAD members would have activities, whether of a research or implementation nature, across many of those game-changing solutions. So I guess a key question is whether there will be resourcing available to effectively engage in those activities on the other side of the Food Summit, and broader question of what will change as a result of the Food Summit in terms of trying to pursue game-changing solutions or the action tracks themselves. I guess it's important that the rhetoric is followed up by actions and resources that lead to outcomes. And given the urgency of the sustainability timelines, scaling of solutions will be critical. So, it's important that we keep in in our frame timelines, and like timelines like 2030 in terms of the agenda for action, and 2050, by which, if we want to stay within the 1.5 degree IPCC target. These are pressing timelines and require quite seismic transformational changes that really would need accelerated deployment and implementation on the other side of the food summit. So while welcoming the building of consensus and some coherence around the actions to be taken and game-changing solutions that could be deployed, it remains to be seen whether the resourcing will be and the political will be there to achieve those in a manner that generates the impact required.
Charlie, are you in any way concerned that, you know, in the drive for consensus building, that you lose out in terms of the, you know, the priorities that need to be on the table from a scientific perspective, from a research and scientific perspective, choices that are going to be made?
Not particularly. So you know, from consensus building is important. Like one of the benefits of consensus building is that if we can get consensus between a broad range of actors, then it's easier for policymakers and politicians to make decisions. But however, if you don't have consensus, it's easier it leads to inaction and stasis, and we don't really have time for stasis and inaction. And so while, you know, we're all aware that there is some lack of consensus, or there may be contention or tensions between different pathways to achieving the ultimate goals of the food summit, it's incumbent upon, I think, all of us to try and forge conflict resolution and consensus building, because if we don't, we will basically slow down achieving the goals that everybody wants.
And then in terms of, you know, I know in our national dialogues, there was some divergent, one of the areas of divergence was that focus on like incremental or instrumental changes versus transformational. Where's that debate at now? And
yeah, like, and just, I guess that this dichotomization, or kind of splitting into kind of two possibilities of incremental versus transformational change, is really driven by the urgency of the sustainability crises that we face. So like the 1.5 degrees IPCC report has indicated that, you know, seismic transformational changes are required across all sectors of the economy if we're to stay within 1.5 degrees by mid-century, and including the agri-food sector. So that's out there. We've been, you know, we're all aware of that. The question is, you know, what are those transformational changes? And this is juxtaposed with the idea of incremental changes, which are tweaks to our existing systems, that we can keep improving the efficiency, that's our existing systems, but at some point there'll be a limit to what we can achieve through efficiency approaches, and we may have to transform to some other system to be able to reach those targets. Examples could be if we had a crop-based landscape, and that we might shift to a forestry-based landscape, and that would be a transformational change, or changing from fossil fuels for transport to renewable energy for transport. That would be a transformational change. So, but the real challenge here really is, it's easy to say these things. The rhetoric is very simple. Transformational change, we're all into it, and we think it's a great idea. However, we really need to identify what the goals of that are, and we should be aware that transformational change is risky. It's really challenging. There's an inertia effect in all our existing systems, that whether they're agricultural systems or any other systems that have been built up over time, and it's very difficult to shift those very quickly to another place. And there may be risks inherent in that, and probably certainly are risks. So really, while we might all agree with transformational change may be necessary, I think there's more space for more conversations on trying to identify what would be the pathways for such transformational change, and what would be the trade-offs and co-benefits with other activities that are happening in the health sector, energy sector, environment sector. So while transformational change is something that is out there in the rhetoric, I think it's important that we interrogate that some more and consider, you know, what is the object to be transformed, and for what outcome, and, you know, what is the pathway to achieve that transformation.
Thanks, Charlie. And I might go on to Tom now, and I'll come back to you in a moment, but just maybe picking up on that, Tom, and I mean, it is a complex issue, and we all understand that there are no easy solutions, and it needs to be holistic and encompassing, and looking through the action tracks and, you know, game changers, there's a lot at play there. So I suppose my question for you is, it is a complex environment, and there are complex factors behind the crisis that we have, not least COVID, climate, conflict, politics. But are you hopeful that the summit's leadership team can deliver what's required in terms of those priorities and transforming the food system over the coming decade? Maybe just your thoughts on that.
Well, I am hopeful, and I haven't been as involved in this whole preparatory process as Paul Kernan has. Obviously, Paul is there in Rome, and he's keeping a very close eye on the day-to-day and doing a fantastic job, may I say. But the point is that over the last number of months, there's been an intense amount of work has gone on. And firstly, to divide it up into the 5 action tracks, then to look at what the key ideas within those action tracks are, and then to begin to boil down to what are really the big ideas coming out of those, and to discuss those. And I mean, what this really is about is seeing, can we get a broadly agreed agenda of change? And if we can, and if you like, next week is a very important moment in that regard. And I think we'll see what emerges out of that. And then a step further on is the summit itself in September. So I think the key question here is, I mean, we have to realize that getting high-level political attention for the topic of food in its broad sense is a very difficult moment. It's competing, this issue of food, with lots of other big topics, with climate change, with the recovery from COVID, with economic uncertainty, with massive geopolitical uncertainty at the moment. So we really have an obligation to see, can we make the best of this moment of the summit in September, but on the clear understanding that the summit in September is a moment in time and is the basis for future policy and policy change. And that's where Charlie's point about, can we make sure that whatever decision, we can't make sure of it, but can we work towards the idea that if we get a degree of consensus about the way forward in terms of transformation of food systems, that has to be followed up by a policy framework at national and international level and resources to back that up. That's the real key that we're faced over the next few months.
Great, thank you, Tom. And maybe they're turning back to you, Charlie, in terms of, I mean, you've already stated there, finding consensus on the practical action out of it, if you like, and also the financing behind it. But just in terms of your own thoughts about what are the areas that Ireland still needs to work on, over the coming weeks and months that we've left leading up to the summit.
So in some sense, Ireland has done a really great job in terms of engaging with the Food Summit. And I guess if we continue in that vein, things will be fine. But at the same point, I think it's important to keep trying to bring the actors together who may not all agree with each other. That's fine. And not everybody has to agree, but at least to kind of maintain dialogue. I think there's a real risk if we don't somehow broker dialogue between groups that tend to polarize themselves into them and us, because there's a danger for both sides of any dichotomy like that really nothing will happen, because there's a risk for politicians. And so we have to identify what goals and where we have common interests and where we have common goals, and at least identify those and agree that the pathways of how to get there, it's not easy to work out what may be the best ones for sustainability and livelihood outcomes. So, that's to be, in some sense, negotiated, worked out, perhaps trialed and tested, but at the same point, at least getting some sort of consensus on what the ultimate goals are. They're kind of broader, it strikes me that Action Track 2 and Action Track 4, Action Track 2 is on sustainable consumption, and 4 is on sustainable or on equitable livelihoods, that they may be really challenging in some sense, and given the increase in hunger that has occurred over the past year. And on the sustainable consumption side, there's a lot of talk about producing more with less, but that can be reframed as producing enough with less. And then the question comes back to all of us: how much is enough? for every person on the planet. And we all have to look, closer to home on what our footprints are and what impacts they have both within Ireland and internationally. And so what is enough is a kind of becomes a development question, I think, for all of us.
Thanks, Charlie. And maybe just finally to Sophie, in terms of your priority, Sophie, I know that obviously that whole thing about sustainable consumption is something that you're concerned about as well. But just what are you hoping will be ahead of the summit?
Sorry, Finola, I missed your question there.
I was just asking, from your perspective, what do you hope Ireland will prioritise from your list? What would be your top thing?
Yeah, well, I first would hope that Ireland would stand with the youth in our formal 50-minute session, especially as a youth constituency. We have received a lot of pushback from other member states and big business on our priority list. We're really hoping to be as collaborative and diverse as we possibly can. So engagement with young people would be number one on my list, not just engagement of Irish youth, but of young people who are not yet seen as Irish citizens living in Ireland, and also of young people across the globe who share the same priorities as Irish young people. Also climate targets, sticking to them and ensuring they stay as part of our food system strategy into the future. It's been said that a lot of these issues get siloed. And as we're looking beyond the UN Food System Summit into Nutrition for Growth and COP26, and as importantly, COI 16, which is the youth COP, we need to ensure that food system transformation is seen in these conversations and dialogues also as part of the climate agenda. And we also need to see, as mentioned by Tom in our Agri-Food Strategy, that the national policies link to our overseas development policies. And I think that has been a really happy thing for me to hear from Tom on this issue.
Great. Thank you very much, Sophie. And thank you to all the panelists. I'm going to please, I can't see the chat right now, but I hope that you have been thinking of questions and comments. Both are very acceptable, and please put them in the chat. But before I do that, I have a couple of people just to ask a quick question to. But I have a question for all of you first, and we have a second poll. Isabel, isn't that right? We want to look at what should Ireland's priorities be? So I asked Sophie that, but I'm asking you now. And we've put up some possibilities there: zero hunger, sustainable healthy diets, climate mitigation and adaptation, better food systems governance, conflict resolution prevention, and food safety. We didn't give you another, but there you go. It's probably enough up there to choose from. So please do choose and press submit. And what just give that a moment or two, but while we're waiting for that, I just want to turn to a couple of people from civil society just to get their thoughts. We'll Isabel, I don't know how quickly the magic is working there behind the scenes. There we go. Okay, so quite a split actually. So on 28%, we have zero hunger and better food systems governance. So that's interesting. Yeah, and I think the whole governance of food systems is an important one. And then just behind that is sustainable, healthy diets. And surprisingly, climate mitigation and adaptation is number 4 in there. And as Sophie said, I think the COP and what comes out of that, and Michelle also mentioned it, is hugely important for this. Great, well, thanks for that. So maybe if I just turn to Conal Foley first from Concern. I believe Conal's on the line there. Conal, Concern has been very involved in the summit process to date. So just be interested in your impressions and some of the opportunities and challenges that you're seeing with it.
Wow, how long have you got, Finola? Thank you.
Yeah, a couple of minutes.
Thanks, Sophie, Charlie, and Tom. firstly, just from a process point of view, it's been extremely messy. I think anybody who's been engaged with it has really tried to be constructive, but I think even the leadership teams themselves would admit that it's fluid, it's dynamic. I heard somebody from the leadership team saying only yesterday that it's an extremely dynamic, changing process on a day-to-day level and scary for the secretariat even. Charlie referred to this great portfolio of game changers, and he's absolutely right. There was a fantastic amount of fantastic suggestions brought in at very different levels. The real tricky bit has been the whole process since then. Those game changers got merged into solution clusters, that got merged into action areas, that got merged into, currently it's proto-coalitions, in case you didn't know, and it's going to be coalitions at the pre-summit. The problem with those is this tricky bit of merging, and it moves out towards generality the whole time. So very worried about, the fact that things just getting generalized into these very broad coalitions, and you don't know what that means in terms of action. So it's hard to know, are we going to lose traction on a lot of the very great individual ideas that came through, where they're going to go? So it's still quite messy in terms of what it means. I think the whole process was very brave, and I really liked the idea that they were trying to do a non-standard UN. And I think Sophie and others already alluded to this. The idea, though, was, of course, that member states would really drive it, and it would be an action and people-led summit. I'm not sure it's panning out like that. Now, the real worry here is, so for example, in a number of the solution clusters, action areas I've been involved in Action Track 1, Action Track 5, you have people who are saying, okay, we have a coalition on, say, the humanitarian development peace nexus, or on, resilience for resilient food systems. Go chase member states to sign up to those. The problem there is, a lot of the ideas from member states came from different departments within the member states. And now the leadership is going back and saying, no, let the member states sign up to whatever areas they think they're really interested in. So you're ultimately going to have a big bun fight within the national dialogues about what they really want to get behind. So I think it's still quite a long way to travel in relation to what that's going to look like in terms of national commitments. The other worry about it is this. I think there will be a tendency, particularly from developing countries, to go for the more technocratic or technical solutions, the ones that are easier to measure, maybe, and that we're going to have an avoidance of the political governance and the underlying causal issues. I think that's a bit of a cause for concern. Now, I think, again, the leadership is going to have to work out to do that, and I suspect it's going to be a broader UN, civil society-driven drive around the right to food, as opposed to technological ones. Sorry, there are a couple of overall concerns about, and I have a lot more, Finola, but let me stop there.
Great. And in terms of the opportunities, Conal, before I let you go, I mean, I think you've made some good points there. Obviously, people are sharing your one on governance because it came up there with quite a high percentage. But just, do you see, in terms of civil society opportunities?
So, I mean, I think in terms of opportunities, I mean, I think, getting people focused on zero hunger clearly from a concern point of view is huge, trying to make sure that that's a key driver. That I suppose that whatever comes out of the Food System Summit, and of course we take the point that we have to be looking at sustainable diets, sustainable environment, and sustainable economies. Like they're exactly what the summit's all about. But that the benefits are disproportionately weighted towards the poorest in society. I guess that to me is a key principle that should be driven through from civil society in relation to the Food System Summit. I think Tom characterized the Irish agro-food system there and mentioned it as, sustainability on economic, environmental, and social levels. Of course, it's all three, but which order? Should it not be social, environmental, and economic? I do think that there is a tricky bit with this Food System Summit. There are so many actors involved, there's so many interests involved, and trying to please everybody while transforming things is a huge task and a huge challenge. But I think the opportunities are to build on some of those great ideas, to get momentum behind them, get them implemented. And as I said, with that weighting towards zero hunger being embedded in it. Thank you.
Great, thanks, Conal. Thanks very much. And maybe moving to Aisling in goal. We've been listening to Sophie talk about youth engagement. I think goal has also been engaging youth. So maybe just give us a sense of that and what are you seeing and hearing?
Hi there. Yeah, we sure have. So I love how much, I suppose, first of all, consensus is coming up here, right? Because we can't really have consensus without dialogue. And so the Goal Global Youth Program is really focused on facilitating dialogue between young people in the Global North and the Global South. So our Global Northerners are pretty much all based in Ireland, but as we know, Ireland is really increasingly diverse. And so the participants in the youth program really clearly represent that diversity. Our Global Southerners are all based in countries where GOAL works, and so we're often connected to the work that GOAL does in addressing challenges related to food systems, as well as climate change. So the participants have really been encouraged to attend the national dialogues on food systems, and then to discuss the many different issues that are coming up for them around those issues. So the youth program really works to support the expertise as well as the experience that is already present in these young people, and encourages them to be reflective and creative in the way that they express and then share what they know. So all of the discussions that we've been having during the seminars that we have together about these issues and the way that they intersect in particular with so many other global development issues has brought us to a place where the participants are producing photo essays. And these demonstrate both the intersections of the issues as well as the interlinkages between themselves and their communities. And so I think that including youth voices in summit dialogues and the spaces around them really clearly helps to illustrate a much more inclusive spectrum of the issues related to food systems. And I think that we have youth to thank for that.
Great. Thank you, Aisling. Just is somebody trying to come in there? Thank you, Aisling. And maybe just our third civil society voice, just before we open up the floor, and is Morris Sadler from World Vision. And Morris, I know World Vision have also been hosting Food Summits Dialogue. And so maybe just tell us, what are you hearing and what are the key issues that you're looking for in terms of what the Irish government brings, but also what the summit comes out with.
Thanks, Finola. And much of what I would say has probably been said already by many people here. And I think Michelle started off well about the fact that the want or the need for the process to be meaningful. And that's something that when we did our dialogue, it was very much around that, around participation and people's right to be involved in decisions and discussions that impact their lives. And I think that's something that hopefully will continue past the summit and keeps on going. I think Tom's point of it being a moment in time is a useful way to consider it. And I think that this gives us a moment in time that we should see going further. And there's probably 4 areas that I would like to see a focus on that would take us forward. One being local solutions. And I think we're all agreed here, including Irish Aid, that we need to start at the community level up. And I think that's what Ireland has been really quite good at across the globe, both from the NGO and the government sector, is working with communities, working to make sure that they're involved in processes around their life and how we keep that going up. One thing that I think we need a strong focus on is gender equality. And I think many of us around this table have been having the same discussion for 15, 20 years now, and it's continuously coming up as gender equality. And why have we not why do I have to stand here and say that again today is something that we need to see a focus on, and how do we improve that? And how do we make sure that we have some meaningful action or a meaningful step forward to recognize the strong role that women play in agriculture, especially in many of the countries we work in, and how do we make sure that we bring around those changes? I think we can't escape from, they're all intertwined, but we have COVID, conflict and climate. But we need to look at our fragile context and the fact that many of the hunger crises we're seeing at the moment are driven by those 3 C's, and how do we actually, again, have a focus on the really unique situation in many of the areas we work overseas and in those conflict-ridden areas. And I think children and youth, and many people have recognized it, and we're looking at the fact that children are impacted by hunger. They are the ones suffering at the moment, but they are also the producers, the consumers, and the people of the future. And how are we capitalizing on the energy of people like Sophie and even younger, and how are we engaging them, and how are they meaningfully involved in these discussions and in decisions that are to come? And how do we, and that came out of our own dialogue, the education system, all the systems that need to go alongside this to make sure people can engage in food systems and making sure we have sustainable food systems and know where we're going in the future. So it's a whistle-stop response to you, Finola.
Thanks, Maurice, and thanks. I think the issue on gender equality and fragile contexts are really important. And with Ireland having a seat on the Security Council, I mean, these are, as we said earlier, they are complex issues, and there's a lot of intersectionality and crossover of these issues. I'm going to turn to a couple of comments, but before I do, I might just bring Paul in, just in terms of the messy but brave process. Paul, do you want to comment on it? And just from your perspective, I'm sure it has been quite complex, and I'm sure we were in COVID. Lockdown, all of that was on top of what was already going to be, what was never always going to be a complex process. So maybe just what are your thoughts on that, and how are you navigating your way through that messy but brave process, as Conall put it?
Yeah, I mean, a very good question. I think I would have to agree. It has been very challenging from, I guess, the representation side here in Rome, and I think, from a number of different perspectives, I think it has to be recognized that the summit has made huge efforts to be as inclusive as possible. And as Tom has mentioned already, this is very much kind of the narrative that the whole process began on. And I think in particular, the unique approach of adopting the national dialogues as a kind of a bottom-up approach that would replace previous summits that adopted, a wholly top-down approach, which many would argue maybe didn't work. I think that has, at the very outset, there was a lot of concern about how that would work, whether it would actually bring together good ideas, and whether it would feed into the process or would actually disrupt or confuse the process. At the moment, there's been over 140 members of the UN have actually gone ahead and held national dialogues, which is a remarkable achievement when you think about it. And depending on how inclusive those dialogues have been, that has captured a huge amount of information in a way that the UN will say isn't particularly built to deliver on. So that unique and innovative approach has been hugely valuable, and it feeds directly into the summit process. What all of that information then being captured has to complement the work, the technical side that's going on in the action tracks, and then go through the process of consolidating and refining down into what we're now calling, multiple different versions of a coalition. But essentially, in essence, what they're looking for now is coalitions, the creation of coalitions that will help drive these things forward, these good ideas forward. I think we have a messy process still ahead of us. Unfortunately, the mess isn't behind. So we have a lot of work to do now until the summit itself in September. And I think what will happen here in Rome between the 26th and 28th is extremely important. It's critical. It's a very valuable, important part of the step. But we can't lose sight of what will happen in Rome too, because we're building towards that. And there's two very important things that I'd just like to kind of highlight as being a big part of the next step is the Secretary General's statement of action or call to action, and the various parts that are contained within that. And that's essentially going to frame what comes out of the summit and how member states are expected to kind of follow the summit. And really, as Thomas said again, the summit is a point in time, but it's setting the scene for what needs to happen over the next decade. I don't think the summit ever set out to achieve food systems transformation. It set out to put us on a path towards that and to help us begin the process of identifying paths. Ireland's further down that road than some member states because of the work we have done through the Agri-Food process, and work needs to continue in that vein. But we're looking to share that through the coalitions and the supports we're working on there. But also what's important too is that we keep an eye on the follow-up and review part of the outcomes of the summit. So the summit set at the very beginning a number of outcomes. The final one was this follow-up and review. And I think it's critically important that Ireland and all member states and all actors in the food system keep a focus on the follow-up and review, because that's really going to cement that we follow through and act on what we say at this political event, essentially what it'll be as a political event in the summit. So I think it has been messy. but I think we have to admire what we have achieved. It hasn't been perfect, but we've done a huge amount of work. The pre-summit is a step towards the summit, but there's 10 years or 9 years of work still to do to 2030. And we all need to figure out how we come together under the statement of action, work in coalitions, support each other towards the right direction. And that's hopefully what the summit will achieve by 2030.
Thanks very much, Paul. Thanks for coming in. I have a few questions here that I'll pose to the panel from the chat. We have, I mean, one just in talking about the follow-up, there is a message here, if I can find it, Alwyn, about, you know, the dialogues continuing beyond September. So it will be just useful to hear perhaps maybe from Tom, but others, you know, about their thoughts about how we keep that dialogue right through the monitoring. We have a question from Una, which says, Una Duggan, to say, how important is it for Ireland to ensure that it is actually a sustainable producer of food in terms of water quality, climate change and biodiversity loss when encouraging others to do the same in the international sphere? And maybe Tom, you might want to take that, but Charlie might have a thought on it as well. And then the third one that I will take here is actually go with those two for now, because the screen has scrolled away with me. So if we can take those one is on the dialogue post summit, and the second on true sustainability in terms of what we do in Ireland. So Tom, do you want to take that one?
Yeah, thank you. I think the success of the food systems dialogues, the fact that they've been held in 140 countries and it's generated a huge amount of enthusiasm, is really one of the perhaps surprising parts of our experience to date. Now, as we go, there's lessons been drawn from those and pulled together. And I think it may be that those conclusions at the end of this process could well be the foundation stone for further plans to develop those dialogues, because in many countries there've been a small number of dialogues. They've given rise to enthusiasm, but in fact, clearly there has to be follow-up. So I think that could be one of the decision points at the summit itself in September, what to do beyond this, to take this momentum forward. Una's point is well made. I mean, clearly, we do say in our document, in our strategy, we're not holding ourselves out as a paragon of virtue. We recognise that there are problems at the moment from an Irish sustainability point of view in terms of water quality, in terms of emissions, and in terms of biodiversity. But the point is that what we've set down in our strategy is a framework for achieving sustainability over this coming decade. That's going to require a whole set of decisions which are consistent with the policy direction that we have set down. But it's going to be a gradual process, I would think, in terms of 3 or 4 year chunks of decision making, and all based on the principles of just transition. That we have to change. We have to do so in a way that facilitates people to make that change. And I think, I think the goal is clear, and the policy framework to support that goal is clear. And I think that's what people should be looking at when they eventually see the final strategy when it's published soon.
Okay. Thanks, Tom. And I found the third question because I knew it was just this panel's view on towards the CAP, and do they think it helps or hinders a sustainable food system? And I'll put that to Charles as well. But, have you a thought on that?
I'll go through the various ones.
Right. Okay. So time to gather. It's from Owen Heffernan.
Yeah, no worries. So on the inclusivity kind of question, I think it's really important that we don't lose sight of the leaving no one behind and reaching the furthest behind first, which was Connell's point. Like in some ways, the Food Summit reminds me of an analogy of a train station with like 5 trains on action tracks, and we need to know who the train drivers are, who's going to be on the train, what the train fare is, are we leaving somebody behind, what the destinations are, and then also what the time of arrival will be. And so, the coalitions may help to achieve that on the other side of the food summit. And then coming to the other question, which was about Ireland's sustainability credentials in the agri-food sector, definitely it is important, and it's important that we reduce the environmental footprint of our agricultural systems on biodiversity, water, and also our climate change emissions. But Ireland does have a challenge in that respect, given the nature of our agricultural system, which is grass-based, largely ruminant production for dairy and beef. We probably do need to do more scenario planning of what other transformation options might be for the agriculture sector in Ireland, because there may not be that many. And it may be the case that Ireland needs to be the best producer of grass-based and dairy globally, and maybe there aren't a lot of options for the agricultural sector in Ireland if you want to shift it, to some other form of land use. And land uses are linked to livelihoods, as we know, and that is contested if we begin to do dramatic kind of land use shifts in Ireland. So there probably is a body of work to do, and the Agri-Food Strategy, has got a lot in there of incremental kind of gains of making a highly efficient system, and with forays into possible transformation, beginning some steps in that direction. Then on the cap is a significant swathe of money, and there has been the greening of the cap, and there is definitely use for a reimagining of how the cap is spent to achieve both distributional kind of equity outcomes within agri-food systems, and also the environment and kind of landscape kind of benefits that Europe kind of aspires to. So, the cap is a significant swathe of funds, and it should be looked at as part of the implementation, at least in Europe, of the food system summit outcomes.
So, Fionnuala, if you want me to come back in there?
Please, yeah.
I've just seen Owen's question there. I didn't quite get it firstly. Well, I mean, the cap is just one of the big policy drivers that is a reality. And it's the basic tramlines for the cap and the budgetary allocations have been agreed in recent months, but it has to sit alongside the wider European Green Deal and the range of things that are there, the farm to fork policy, the biodiversity strategy. And then we have to interpret all of that at a national level to see how in practice these European policy directions are to be put into place in an Irish context. And that's exactly where some of the difficult decision making is going to have to be made here in Ireland. But what we would be saying is that the policy principles that are set out in our strategy, which are there for the next 10 years, should be informing the decisions, the short-term decisions that will have to be taken by Irish policymakers on things like the CAP strategic plan, which will apply in Ireland over the next 3 to 4 years.
Yeah. Thank you, Tom. Okay, we might move on to another couple of questions. I have one in there from a researcher at the IIEA, Stephen Frayne, who is asking, how aligned do speakers feel Ireland's priorities are with those of other EU member states? And do speakers envisage challenges to finding consensus between countries in the global north? And that's a big question. And maybe linked to the global south, Olive Toig from Concern said, the dialogues in Ireland partner countries have, in our experience, been very uneven. Some inclusive, others not yet happening. And Ireland's delegations have played a supportive role in many countries, which has made a meaningful difference. But there is, and it would be critical after September. So I suppose there's a question really about, the uneven nature of that. So we might go with those two, if you have any responses to those. And Sophie, from a youth perspective as well, if you've, I don't want to be pushing you on the spot with Irish Aid countries, but maybe I'll start with Tom and then anyone else who would like to come in from the panel, whether, I suppose, Sophie, it'd be interesting to hear also from you about youth engagement, and has that been patchy across countries in the global south? So maybe Tom, start with you there.
Okay, well, I think I'm trying to address Olive's question insofar as I am interpreting it correctly. you know, I've seen in the last few months a number of African countries grappling with the idea of having food systems dialogues. And there's a great variability in their capacity to do that. And I think that is the reality. That's the fact is that many African countries are at an early stage in their planning for a sustainable food system. They're not normally used to planning in those terms. They're normally used to planning as we were for many years on the basis of established departmental objectives like a Department of Agriculture or a Department of Health and the Department of Environment. The challenge of bringing some of these perspectives together and planning in a way which you're going to develop synergies and co-benefits of policy, that's a very significant challenge. And that's why one of the areas that Ireland has, if you like, put a particular emphasis on in the Food System Summit and in the pre-summit is this coalition that's talking about food systems transformation and how this can actually be achieved. And it's a not insubstantial challenge, I assure you. And I mean, I speak from experience of trying to get agreement on our own one here, but we were in a completely different place than many other African countries. So there is a journey to be embarked on here. And I think the value of this food system summit is that bit by bit, countries are being brought to realize that it's a journey they have to embark on, even though they're starting out in very different places. And they do need help. They need help particularly from within Africa itself, and whatever experience our countries that are systems are working, and they will also need help from outside.
Yeah. And in terms of the EU question, Tom, would you like to address that at all in terms of how are we aligned to our EU other EU member states? Well,
again, there's a divergence here, but I mean, I think by and large, Ireland has been, I would say, more aligned than many other countries. 2 years ago, I chaired something for the European Commission called the Task Force on Rural Africa. And that was attempting to answer the question, how can Africa and Europe work together to assist in the whole development of African the agri sector and the rural economy? It's very important, I think, that we see it in those terms, not just in terms of agricultural sector development. And subsequent to that, Ireland initiated its own exercise here to see how Ireland could begin to pull together the various interests it had in the agri-food sector to if you like, to contribute to the maximum effect with Africa. And that has now has translated into a policy which has been adopted by Foreign Affairs and which, you know, will be the basis for our policy into the future. So I think we're in a good place overall here.
Okay, great. I'm going to move on to another few questions because they're coming in thick and fast now. I have 3 that I'd like to go to. One from Michael McCarthy Flynn at Oxfam, who says, can the panelists comment on the concerns and criticisms of large sections of global civil society about the UNFSS, especially those representing smallholders in the global south and indigenous people? They have expressed concern over power asymmetries, the lack of human rights approaches, undue influence of large corporate actors, and the sidelining of civil societies and indigenous peoples mechanisms of the Committee of World Food Security. So you can see the question there for yourself. So that's one I'd like maybe to put on the table. A second one from Olive on given our commitment to leave no one behind, how can we as a country ensure sufficient focus on food systems in conflict contexts? These are surely the furthest behind. And I'll take a third one from Siobhan Curran from Trócaire. Do any of the panel have views on how corporate accountability is being addressed so far in the lead up to the summit? And recent data from the Business, Human Rights and Resource Centre identifies agribusiness as a huge risk factor for attacks on human rights defenders. Agribusiness has been linked to land grabs, displacement, denial of free consent, and violations of workers' rights, including women and migrants. so I'll stick with that rather than going to the second part. You can read the question there yourself. But so we have Michael McCarthy Flynn on civil society, and yeah, there's some concerns about power. We have Siobhan's on human rights issues, really bringing in the rights here, and the third one on conflict. So I don't know who'd like to start with that.
Finola, can I talk to the one on the civil society mechanism, maybe?
Please do, yes.
Yeah. So just to respond to Michael, I mean, I think that a number of the different action tracks, a number of people in the leadership team have made significant effort to reach out to the civil society mechanism of the CFS. And I know people like Christine Campo, who's been leading Action Track 4, has really done so. I think people like Martin Frick, who's obviously in the leadership team, who was very instrumental on the human rights side in the past, has made significant efforts to engage with them. But the real problem was that the civil society mechanism really didn't want to engage. I mean, they put up conditionalities. They said, we won't engage with the summit unless Agnes Kalibata is removed, blah, 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 blah. And it's basically a standard, and it's an old, I mean, we all know this is a long time standing. It's a very anti-private sector one. Now, I think the whole, you know, the power of transnational corporations is a significant issue, of course, that needs to be tackled as part of this. But the private sector and small and medium enterprise in particular play a huge role in Food System Summit. So the engagement around the private sector needs to happen. But all I would say around that, Michael, is that significant effort has been tried to engage the CSM mechanism. There is the governance levers also looking at the right to food. There has been significant engagement with Indigenous communities. Again, it's been mixed, I think, how that's translated through. But it certainly hasn't been the fault of the leadership of the Food System Summit that some of those civil society groups just haven't engaged. But, you know, it's a long-standing discussion.
Okay, thanks, Conal. And I see Charlie and I think Sophie had said that they would come back in on this. So Charlie, do you want to comment?
Yeah, I can just give a few reflections on the questions around leaving no one behind and so forth. I think it's really important that there is greater clarity and definition of, you know, who are the furthest behind. And then having done that, you know, if the aspiration is to be met about reaching the furthest behind first, which, you know, then that gives a lens for prioritization of resources and efforts. And perhaps that lens is a filter that could be applied across the action tracks and across all of the game-changing solutions. Because if that is missing, then we're not really in the business of meeting the 2030 agenda for action, or at least what was the intentions behind that. And even the simple definition of identifying who's the furthest behind first, from a nutritional point of view, it can be people suffering from undernutrition, but there's also people suffering from overnutrition. And there's overlaps with poverty. We know that in relation to malnutrition in general. And so there is greater potential for a stronger lens to be applied to identifying who the furthest behind are, and then what would be the prioritization mechanisms to reach them first before 2030.
Thanks, Charlie. And I think, Sophie, you were going to come in on Indigenous people, were you?
Yes. Yeah, I just wanted to say that I don't think anybody at the UNFSS wants the summit to become another CFS. I think if anybody stepped into CFS before, the very first time I stepped in, I was astounded to find that the private sector mechanism and the civil society mechanism were given two different agendas and different events to attend. And this is something that shouldn't happen at UNFSS. And it's so easy for different mechanisms to fall into this way of working and this siloed way of working, because it has been like that for so long in different summits and in different organizational structures. And this is something that we don't want to see. And I know in Action Track 4's cluster on rebalancing agency is completely dedicated to Indigenous game-changing solutions, which is really, really motivating to see. And we're working so strong to hold them there and to keep the member states who've signed up to support these game-changing solutions accountable. I'd also like to just come in slightly on a few of the other questions that were posed. For one, in terms of youth engagement, what we found in the independent dialogue structures and in the national convening structures, actually the Global South have been much more engaged with youth than the Global North in their national dialogues. We've seen from Ireland a really strong focus on youth, which I think is fabulous, but we haven't seen from other European member states. But what we have also found in terms of independent dialogue structures is how accessible they have become, because UNFSS is completely online and it's really, really incredible, but how inaccessible that is to so many other young people right across the globe. We have a young member, part of the Youth Liaisons Group, who has convened 77 independent dialogues with young people within his community, but he has no way to feed back on those dialogue formats because it's a completely online feedback form, and he only has his Nokia flip phone, and once a week he comes into a computer room and he links in with us that way. But it has been really difficult for him to feed back on what his young people in his community have been saying. I think this is the issue when it comes to it, because if you are an independent activist, it's really difficult to feedback. But if you're a part of, for example, the World Association of Girl Guides and Girl Scouts, or the International Federation of the World Cross, or GOAL, it can be really easy to feedback through their mechanisms. And also I wanted to come in on corporate accountability, because this is something that the youth mechanism has been working really hard on, and it's been really difficult to engage a lot of CEOs of big business. But what we are doing is we have created a CEO roundtable discussion where we have some big CEOs from Bayer, Danone, Oatly, to name but a few, who will be sitting with young people who have been part of the UNFSS mechanism to talk about corporate responsibility in a diverse, inclusive and collaborative space. So yeah, thanks, Finola, back to you.
Thanks very much. And I think maybe Michelle is not with us. I was going to get her to maybe to comment on the corporate accountability, but I think she's not here. So we can maybe, Sean, we can get back on that one if you feel it's appropriate that Irish Aid would respond to that. Okay, I see somebody's hand is up. I think Michael O'Brien's hand has been up. So Michael, I'm not sure if you have a comment or a question, but we're almost out of time, so I'll have to ask you to be brief, please.
Thanks, Finola. So I wanted to respond, I suppose, to some of the points that have been made and questions asked in the chat, as well as give something of Trócra's perspective on the Food System Summit. So first of all, very much welcome, today's briefing. We do, believe that it's very much overdue, this focus on food systems, given, the interconnected global challenges. We also would really acknowledge, the commendable ambition that Ireland has in becoming a global leader on sustainable food systems over the next decade. And perhaps I can use this moment to advertise a launch event tomorrow of a report which Oxfam Ireland and Trócra commissioned, which is looking at sustainable food systems and steps Ireland can take to become a global leader. We'd also very much, strongly, recognise Ireland's reputation in working to tackle hunger and zero hunger and the ambition of the SDGs, and very much agreeing with Michelle's initial comments around the critical centrality of food systems to the entire Agenda 2030, all 17 goals. In terms of achieving that ambition, I suppose, again, the growing consensus on food systems transformation, and agreeing with Charlie's point in relation to interrogating that transformation, because transformation can be both positive and negative. It's not a benign concept. And so when Trócra speaks about transformation, it speaks about sustainable transformation, as opposed to incremental changes, which are crucial for delivering that ambition over the next decade. In terms of the private sector and private sector accountability, which has come up, which hasn't been a focal point of this conversation, we believe that for all actors, it's really important to have a common understanding of food systems and sustainable food systems. And in that regard, we as Trócra support the 6 dimensions of food security across all of the stakeholder groups, in understanding and supporting a coherent transformational change. So Trócaire has endorsed a call for governments, private companies and civil society to adopt the 13 key principles as a unifying framework for food systems transformation as outlined by the Committee on Food Security's high-level panel of experts. Just to close, we made 3 particular points that are relevant to the conversation that's been taking place in our reflections on the March Action Track 1 potential game changers. And the first of those very much relates to the centrality and the ultimate goal of transforming food systems, which is to realize human rights to the adequate right for food, and especially for those who are furthest behind, who have been marginalized by current strategies and policies. So democratic, inclusive decision-making and effective accountability mechanisms are essential for just transitions. And that term we haven't heard today in today's conversation, but just transitions, okay, require an enabling environment that provides positive incentives and buffers for food producers while they transform their systems along multiple pathways and await the realization of the full benefits that can be realized. And clearly, supporting women, young people is critical within this. A second of the 3 points is appropriate sustainable agri-food metrics. We haven't heard anything about metrics for sustainable food systems today. So this is really important for all relevant stakeholders. They need to go beyond the classic measures of simply measuring productivity, agricultural productivity, to assess food systems against their contribution to social equity, women's empowerment, economic productivity and prosperity, environmental regeneration, and resilience building to climate and other shocks. And then to finish, I suppose it's in response to Conal's comments in relation to the civil society mechanism of the Committee on World Food Security and his previous comments in relation to the messiness, I suppose, and the labyrinth structure of the Food Systems Summit process itself. And certainly that labyrinth structure has been really difficult, I think, for marginalized communities to be fully engaged within a truly inclusive process, despite, the various dialogues that have been held. And we in Trócaire would very much, urge, that the Food Systems Summit is not a catalyst, to advance new modes of decision-making that could lead to the further exclusion of already marginalized voices in food systems. So Ireland's ambition to be a leader on sustainable food systems should include a clear articulation of strengthening the mandate and role of the most inclusive intergovernmental and international global platform for food security and nutrition, which is the Committee on World Food Security, and the Rome-based multilateral agencies for the governance of agriculture and food systems.
Now, Michael, I'm sorry, I'm going to have to, we're going to be out of time in just a minute. So just maybe one last word. I think I would urge people maybe to come to the event tomorrow. Perhaps would you mind putting up the link to it on the chat? That would be really helpful.
Yeah, I think the link has gone up in the chat, Finola, yeah.
Oh yeah, and sorry to cut you, Michael, but we are going to be cut off soon, and I know people are finishing up in about 3 minutes. So really thanks a million for the input there. I think the paper is well worth getting, everyone, and I think we are almost out of time. So I'm just going to finish there, and so I just want to I just have a couple of very last minute actions to do. I just first of all want to say a huge thank you to our panel. I would perhaps maybe like to come back to them all just for 1 second and tell me, are you extremely optimistic, very optimistic, somewhat optimistic, not so optimistic, or not at all optimistic on the future of the summit? So Sophie, maybe starting with yourself.
I'm somewhat optimistic, I think, with a few reservations, but overall happy.
Yeah, thanks very much. Charlie, yourself?
Yeah, I also would be optimistic. I think we have to stay optimistic, and it's important that we engage in these processes. And these processes are an ongoing building thing that we have to do. And so beyond the food summit, we're going to have COP26, we'll have the biodiversity summit, we'll have the nutrition summit. So, you know, that has to feed into those processes. But really what's important is how any outcomes are felt tangibly by people on the ground, and particularly those who are the furthest behind. And so I'd be optimistic that it helps to raise awareness and political sensitivity, and ideally mobilize resources and policies to a better future for everyone.
Tom, your thoughts?
Well, I'm somewhat optimistic in that I think it's going to give a political momentum to look at food systems and their importance. How to deliver that is the key. And I have one, I suppose, broad concern, and it is that all this discussion about food system transformation is getting to a level of complexity that I think is daunting, too daunting. Because if you are going to get decisions, somebody once said to me many years ago, if you want to achieve change, you have to be able to describe it in language that children and prime ministers can understand. We're getting to the point where there's some of the more detailed concepts of the future of food system transformation are so complex that nobody's going to be able to understand it. And it's going to have to be brought down to understandable political propositions. And I think that's going to be one of the challenges for the Food System Summit in September. I'm confident that the leadership around the Food System Summit can do that. But I would just caution that is a problem that has to be faced up to and addressed.
Great. Well, I think, as I say, we're almost out of time. I just have a couple of comments. I think what we heard, first of all, a huge thanks to our panelists, to all of you, to Sophie, to Tom, to Charlie, and indeed to Conall, to Aisling, to Morris, and to all of those who contributed from the floor, including Michael. And I'm sorry, cutting off my own colleague is a hard thing to do, but we are out of time, and well worth hearing. But we do need to keep to the time. And I suppose what we want to do is embrace all of the ideas. And so I think what I heard today is dialogue is really important. It's hard. It hasn't been inclusive everywhere. It hasn't included all the groups that we want to do. And I think we need to keep our eye on that, whether it's Indigenous people, whether it's a focus on human rights, whether, as Maura said, it's around gender equality, and as Conall said, whether it was messier than it needed to be. But I think we have to keep trying, and we have to keep trying as Ireland. I hate saying Ireland Inc., but I can't think of anything else to call it at the moment, but as a collective here in Ireland. We heard a lot about civil society and the engagement and really coming up to solutions that are transformative and that are context specific and address some of those complex issues, including fragile and conflict affected states and the climate crisis, but also some of the political and issues that are leading to some of the food security issues that we're seeing. We need to be brave. It is messy at the moment. We'd like to have more brave, less messy, and let's try and move towards that. And I think we also want solutions and pragmatic solutions that we can deliver on. And I think there's a clear message for the Irish government about us continuing to dialogue right beyond this through the period of monitoring. And I should also, of course, acknowledge Sean, Chris, Michelle, and indeed Paul for coming in. And thank you all very much for your preparation, for your input, and hopefully you will take the ideas from today and incorporate them into what you bring to the pre-summit. So I hope I haven't left anybody out. Of course I have Patrice and Isabel, who've been doing all the hard work in the background. So thank you so much from IFIAD. So if I've forgotten anyone, my apologies, but thank you all for staying on. We're just a few minutes over. So thanks all, and hopefully the conversation will